Hi designers. Today we're going to be focusing on the elements of space and texture to create a digital painting or digital drawing of a landscape. You'll need a landscape photo, either one that you've taken yourself or one that you found on the internet. And what we're looking for is a landscape with multiple layers. So a background that's very far in the distance, something that's a little bit closer, maybe like clouds, a middle ground, and then a foreground, something really close up to the viewer. You don't want anything too complicated, and you want to avoid people, animals, and buildings. Buildings that are far away, like the town of Toledo here, that's okay, but we don't want to have to focus in too much on architecture because we're just focusing on creating that sense of space with the different layers and then the texture, especially texture in the trees and things like that. Once you have your photo open in Photoshop, the first thing that you're going to do is resize the image. Come up to the image menu, go to image size, change the resolution to 200 pixels per inch, and change the width to 20 inches. You'll see these other numbers, the height and width of the pixels and the height of the picture will change. That's fine. We just want the width to be 20 and the resolution to be 200. Then you can either zoom in or zoom back out to resize your photo. A quick way to do that is to hit Command 0 and it will recenter the image. The next thing we're going to do is set up a couple of things in Photoshop. So over here on the Layers panel, you know that this little image window is called the thumbnail, but for this project we want it to be a little bit bigger. So control click on your control click on your panels, and then you're going to go to large thumbnails, and that gives you a little bit bigger picture of the layer. The next thing we're going to do is create the different layers. Now this is going to be individual to your picture, but you should at least have 3 layers. A background, like the sky, a middle ground, and a foreground. You might create more layers than that if you have additional things, like I'm going to create a 4th layer just for the clouds. So create those layers by clicking on the new layer button at the bottom of the layers panel, and then double click to rename the layer. So my background is the sky. Double click, I'm going to make a different layer for the clouds because I see those in front of the sky. My middle ground is the town of Toledo in Spain. And then my foreground is these trees and bushes right up here. There we go. So now our layers are all set up. For this project, we're going to be mostly using 2 tools, the brush tool here and then the eyedropper tool. The shortcut for the brush tool is B, and the shortcut for the eyedropper tool is I. And even though you don't use a lot of the shortcuts in Photoshop, for this project, those 2 can be really handy because you go back and forth quite a bit. So let's start with the brush tool. And we're going to start by working on the thing that's farthest away. This technique that we're using actually goes back to the painters of the Renaissance. They would start by choosing the thing that was farthest away from them and paint that all on the canvas. So we're going to cover the entire canvas with the sky color. Let's first set up our brush. Come up to the options bar, and you've probably noticed that you have these different brushes available to you. If you'd like to see them a little bit larger, you can click on the gear up here and also change your brush menu to large thumbnails, and that really allows you to see the differences. Part of this project is exploring the different brushes. So we have different textures here with these brushes. You can see there's even some that make leaves, some rough textures, some puffy textures. And then there's brushes that imitate paint brushes or airbrushes or the pencil. And you'll see if you click on one of these, you also get a little icon over here that shows you the pressure. If you're using a mouse, the pressure will not change, but if you're using a Wacom tablet, it would. So let me also show you there are other brushes that you can add. There's all these different brush menus over here. So if you click on assorted brushes and then append or add them, you're going to get even more brushes. So I encourage you to add more brushes and to really try them out. For the first layer, the sky layer, we're just going to be using the normal brush. Pretty large. I'm going to make it even larger than 200 so that I can cover the sky, and hardness all the way up at 100%. I'm also going to turn the opacity of the brush all the way up to 100% because I want to start by filling in this layer with color. I can switch over to the eyedropper tool using the shortcut I and then pick up the medium color for the background. So in my case it's medium blue. Go back to the brush tool using the shortcut B, and then making sure that I'm on the background sky layer, I'm going to fill in the sky completely with this color. Now you'll notice that now we can't see the picture, and so in this project you'll go back and forth between toggling the visibility on and off so you can see what you're doing, or you can even turn the opacity of the layer down so that you can see through it. It's really up to you, and this really tests your ability to understand layer opacity and brush opacity. Layer opacity is how see-through the layer is. Brush opacity is how much color or how much effect are you using with the brush. I'm going to leave the opacity up at 100% right now and just toggle off the visibility for just a moment. So I also look at the sky here and I see that there's some light blue towards the horizon and some dark blue near the edge of the photo. So I'm going to use the eyedropper tool to pick up the light blue in the background and then turn the sky layer back on and use the brush tool. But this time, instead of using 100% opacity and a hard brush, because that doesn't give me the effect that I want, I'm going to turn the hardness of the brush all the way down so I get this nice soft fuzzy brush, and I'm going to turn the opacity of the brush down so that I'm not applying a lot of that light blue at once. The lower the opacity on the brush tool, the more see-through the color is. I'm going to make the size even a little bit larger. Whoa, that's really big. And now I can come through and I can paint on a little bit lighter of a color here near the horizon. And check to see if that's matching. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And then I can also use the eyedropper to pick up this darker blue and do the same thing. Again, I'm using my shortcuts, I for the eyedropper and B for the brush tool. Alright, that looks pretty good. Now I'm ready to move on to the clouds. For the clouds, this brush is just a big round brush. It doesn't match the texture of the clouds. So I'm going to come up to my brush menu and I'm going to find one that matches the texture. I really like this one. It really looks like clouds to me. You'll notice that this brush does not have any hardness settings. It works a little bit differently than the other brush. And I'm going to start with the largest clouds and fill them in first, starting with a medium value. So using I for my eyedropper, I'm going to suck up a medium gray, and then back to my brush tool. And let's turn the opacity back up just a little bit. And you'll notice with this brush tool, it actually uses different colors of gray, medium and light, which is perfect for the clouds because there's all different kinds of gray in the clouds. So I'm just clicking and letting go. If I were to hold this, this would create a different effect, which might work. This is really all about testing out the different brushes and seeing what works for your picture. I can also use the brackets to make the bracket shortcut on my keyboard to make the brush a little bit smaller to create different sizes of clouds. So depending on how detailed your picture is, you want to work from big to small, adding these details, adding this texture. If there's any area that's in the background here that goes over another layer, like where these trees are, I can just go right over it. That helps fill in behind the trees. And then later, when I'm working on the foreground layer, I would add the trees on that layer right over where the clouds are. And so now I can check what I've got by turning back on the sky layer. That's looking pretty good. I need to blend these little clouds a little bit more, but these big clouds look really good. So you're going to continue this technique, picking up the middle value color for each layer, choosing a brush that matches the texture, and then adding in. Let's do one more layer together. Let's do the middle ground. Now, your middle ground is probably a lot more detailed, so you're going to just kind of look at it and say, what's a color that would cover this whole area here? And I'm going to pick one of these medium browns. And to start off with, I'm just going to choose a brush, maybe just that normal hard brush that we're used to working with, at 100% opacity. And I'm just going to fill in this entire area. And maybe down here where it's green, maybe pick up that color and fill in this area with that color. Now this doesn't look anything like the landscape at first, but this just gives me a base from which to work. If you notice that your brush is kind of skipping, this is the placement of the brush. You can come up here to this little brush menu. It looks like a folder with brushes on it. Click on that and you see the spacing right here. If you move that down, you'll get a much smoother brush. You can play with these other settings if you like to, the brush presets. Alright, so here's where it would really help me to turn the opacity of the layer down so that I can see through it and I can see what I want to add. For instance, I picked up this green and now I can add some of that green in these areas where these trees are showing through. Now that texture doesn't really match, so maybe I want to try a different texture for that area. That's where you're going to go up and use the brush menu, and just try out different ones. Maybe this speckled texture will work better. We're just starting with the medium value, and then we can go back and add shadows and highlights. If we check that, that looks good. Oh, it looks like a little bush, a little trees out there in the distance. Again, I can make the color a little bit darker to create some shadows and lighter to create some highlights. So you'll just continue doing that for each layer, building up your details. So this is what I have so far. If I turn the opacity of this one all the way up. Not quite looking like Toledo yet, but I have a lot of details left to add. So I hope you have fun with this project.